Hey everyone, Mario again, coming at you with another movie review. Today I'm reviewing the sequel to the movie I reviewed last time, Austin Powers, The Spy Who Shagged Me. Now, as I mentioned in my previous review, this was the first entry of this series I saw. Of course, when I first saw it, there was only 2 entries, and as I mentioned, I went back and saw the first one through. I'm not going to repeat the story of how it went, but of the 2, because of how I saw them, this was the film I watched more of it. So when I was younger, I guess I liked this film more. But now watching it with a more mature mind frame, I'll say they're both funny in different ways. The first one is more self-aware in its humor, and this one's a little bit more subtle. Except of course, for maybe this, it's more like a normal comedy, but there are some self-aware stuff in it. But they're more subtle. But I would say for me now, watching it now, they're probably about equal in how funny they are. And which film do I like more? Kind of hard for me to say. I mean, the same characters and all that. It's just tone going for humor is similar. It's just you go about it a different way. I guess it comes down to whether you like the self-aware humor or the more subtle self-aware humor here. I like both, so it's hard for me to pick. I'll say based on what I remember, they're both superior to the next film, which that's another video. Now, like the first film, the movie is directed by Jay Roach, and it is written by Mike Myers, but unlike the first film, he had help from a screenwriter, it looks like, a Michael McCullers, which I'm going to check real quick to see what this guy has done. Let's see. Oh, he was a former writer on Saturday Night Live. And other than this, he also helped with the screenplay for the next film, Goldmember. He was the writer and director of Baby Mama. And that's about it says. I would say you can tell that Myers had some help with here, because I would say probably the weakest element of the first film was some of the dialogue. Granted, it was funny, but you could tell it probably could have been written a little bit better. Maybe with another writer, it could have been funny, but maybe a little bit more subtle in what it was making fun of. With this one, you can tell that Mike Myers had that additional person helping him, because you get what he's making fun of. Sometimes it takes a while, because I will say some of the jokes in this film and the first film I did not get. Like some of them I'm like, okay, I get that, but then as I got older I'm like, oh, I get that now. Some of them it's so ridiculous that I couldn't get it. Like one of them is the massage joke. Lower, how does that feel, baby? He lowered the tone of his voice to like a bass. I'm like, oh, okay. But anyway, back to my point. Because of the additional writer, he can do the same jokes, but be more subtle about it. Now, of course, I know from the outtakes that a couple of the stuff, some of the dialogue in that probably was ad-libbed on the spot when Mike was in character thinking of random stuff. But the dialogue that comes directly from the script, you can tell that Mike had someone helping him with it. Which I guess is one advantage this film has over the previous film, is that the dialogue and all that is better. But the humor, I'd say the levels are about even. Like before, Jay Roach direction, still very great, gets good performances out of the actors, shot the scenes pretty well. And I can see why this film has a pretty good fan base. It has a 6.6 on IMDb, has 72% with the audience on Rotten Tomatoes, lower with the critics where it's 51, which for Rotten Tomatoes is just, it says splatter, but I thought 50 was supposed to be the cutoff of rotten and splatter. I guess I'm wrong. I guess 60 is. Now the consensus is provides lots of laughs from Myers at the helm, is funny or funnier than the original. I guess that depends on who you ask. I'd say they're probably about equally funny, but there are more. I think I probably get a little bit more laughs out of this film than the original, but maybe that's just me. Now the plot of the film is that at the beginning it does a little spoof of how the Bond films always would open with like a song, and I think this is actually a pretty good one. I actually never got that's what it was making fun of. Of course, now I'm doing a little bit more about James Bond. I don't know, I haven't listened to all the Bond songs, but it seems to me like it's making fun of the Goldmember song, because that song is specifically about the villain, and this song is specifically about Dr. Evil. Evil, evil is his one and only name. Evil, in his mind there is no other game. Yes, evil. Now, of course, Dr. Evil, he comes back to Earth, and the first time you see him, which as you can tell was my introduction to the character, is on the set of Jerry Springer, which comes into the film was like, really, they're having Jerry Springer? But for how it works with establishing Dr. Evil and Scott's relationship in this film, it works, and it's very funny. You know it's all scripted, even more so than what the Jerry Springer show probably already could be, but that's not going there. But it's still very funny, especially considering the topic is my father is evil and he wants to take over the world, and the other two fathers, one is a skinhead and one is a Nazi. I got your hood! I got your hood! I couldn't help but still chuckle at that. Meanwhile, Austin is still enjoying his honeymoon with his wife, Vanessa. And of course, introduction to the character, so going back and watching the first film, I'm like, okay. Maybe at the time I didn't notice they messed with continuity, but apparently now I notice that that's actually the joke. It's making fun of sequels that do poorly written stuff like that. It's a very subtle thing to catch, but it's mostly when Austin actually finds out they know all along, like, wait a minute, what the? Alright. Anyway, Vanessa turns out is a fembot, and she dies. And of course, Austin does a speech about lamenting about it. You know, the woman who taught me the beauty of monogamy was a fembot all along. Wait a tick. That means I'm single again. So in character for Austin, of course. He's going to still be monogamous if he chooses to be, but, you know, he's single again, so... Hey, you know, every cloud has a silver lining. Now, Dr. Evil, his plan is to go back in time, steal Austin Powers' mojo, and basically stop Austin that way. And of course, he has invented a time machine to do so. And he goes back in time along with his new accomplice, his 1/8 size clone, played by Vern Troyer, Mini-Me. Which of course everyone remembers his character, and basically was Vern Troyer's breakout role. And of course, depending on when and where you ask him, it's probably the bane of his existence now. Like, I shall call him Mini-Me. I wonder how many times he's actually had that said to him. From what I hear, it gets annoying for him. Now, Dr. Evil and Mini-Me go back to 1969, 2 years after Austin and him were frozen, and they meet a younger number 2, played by Rob Lowe, Frau Farbissina, once again played by Mindy Sterling, and Austin's mojo is stolen by a agent that Dr. Evil hired named Fat Bastard, like Dr. Evil and Austin, played by Mike Myers, so we get to hear him with a Scottish accent. And of course, once Austin realizes he's lost his mojo, the Ministry of Defense shows him a time machine they've made, and after a little joke about the whole principle of time travel, he goes back in time to stop Dr. Evil, reclaim his mojo, and save the world. And of course, along the way, he gets a new partner, and CIA agent Felicity Shagwell, played by Heather Graham. Of course, he has to deal with the usual agents, like we see Mustafa again, introduction to the character, and of course, Will Ferrell. And of course, they have to stop Dr. Evil's main plan, which, other than the mojo, is he's placed a giant laser on the moon, and he's basically holding the world hostage for the same amount of money he was holding it in the first film, which is kind of a joke because of the time travel thing, but it works. Now that's about all the plot I'm going to go into, you know, story-wise, like that. But it all works. Mike Myers is still on top of his game as Austin and Dr. Evil, and I think out of the 3 films, this is where he does those 2 characters the best. You know, Austin, you know, you can tell he learned from the first film, and you really do feel with him as the story goes along, especially when he meets the character Felicity, because Felicity is basically just a female version of him, just amped up a little bit, and you can tell from what he's learned through the events of the first film, he's like, okay, now I see what Vanessa meant by when she said that was bad. And of course, despite that, you can tell he's a little hurt. It might just make him seem a little hypocritical at one point, but he's learned since then. And of course, also, I'm not going to spoil all of it, but adds a little drama to it. Dr. Evil. Story-wise, you can tell he bonds with Mini-Me almost instantly, because basically it is him, just a clone of it. His relationship with his son is much more strained, and he basically disowns him more than he did in that scene at the end of the first film, which is what we see the first time. Why'd you run out on me? Because you're not quite evil enough. You're quasi-evil. You know, all that. Just 1 calorie, not evil enough. And of course, with the introduction of Mini-Me, you know, now Scott has someone to vie with Dr. Evil for affection, which goes throughout the whole film, his whole relationship with Mini-Me. And of course, the character of Fat Bastard, you know, only has a few scenes, but Mike Myers does such a great job as the character. You makes you hate him, and he's just so full of himself. But then at the end, we see that he does that to cover up the pain, and as well as eating and all that. And of course, he does a good job in that scene. And he carries it over for a little bit of the characters in the next film, but he does it best here. Heather Graham as Felicity. She did a pretty good job as the love interest. Like the first film, you do believe the chemistry between Austin and her. It's a little bit more here because of the fact she's from the 60s, which even though Austin no longer is in the 60s, and he's getting more used to modern era, he still has his heart in the, I guess, steal from a song, he left his heart back in the 60s. I know I didn't carry the, I know I carried the melody like crap there, but I think you get the point. And of course, like I mentioned before, since she's basically like a female version of Austin, that with the stuff he's learned, it kind of combats. But you do believe their love story, and I have to say, in my opinion, their love story is a little bit more believable than Austin and Vanessa was. But that's just me. And Heather has good chemistry with Mike, and they do get a lot of good jokes, especially the infamous scene, you know, just keep digging, darling. These people make me sick. I think you guys know what joke I'm talking about. Michael York, once again, as Basil Exposition, does a very good job. Most of the scenes, he's the younger one that we see briefly at the beginning of the first film, but he does a good job. And of course, he's also involved in one of the funnier gags in it. This coffee smells like shit! It is shit, Austin. And like the first film, you know, he's basically there to provide information, hence his name, Basil Exposition. And he does his job wonderfully. Robert Wagner, he's only in it a little bit as number 2, but he does still a good job. I do like that they added burn makeup to his face to show that even though he was burned in the first film, he did survive. Rob Lowe, his younger number 2, did a very good job as well. And I have to say, he was perfect casting for a couple of reasons. One, Lowe actually knew Wagner when he was, by this time. And apparently at one point he even dated one of Wagner's daughters, and had even already come up with an impersonation of him, you know, which you could tell in Lowe's voice. If you didn't know that, you would think, did Wagner dub over Lowe? But no, it's actually Lowe's voice. Which I have to think, if you're going to play a younger version of the person, you probably should study their mannerisms and probably try to make your voice sound a little bit like theirs, so it'd be passable that you were the younger version of him. Which on a side note, in my acting class, this is one of the things we did kind of learn, but me, I didn't really do so good on it, mostly because the person that they had me do was kind of like a polar opposite of me, and how they walked and all that, and also the fact that I got sick around that time and I couldn't even use my voice. You know, side note anyway. Getting back on it, you really do believe that Lowe and Wagner, their character is the same guy. And of course I do like that they even got Lowe back for a brief little shot in the next film. Mindy Sterling, once again, as Frau, very good. And I do like that she begins kind of a relationship with Dr. Evil in this film, once he's taken some of the mojo, and it adds to another little nice emotional scene at the end of the movie, which I'm not going to spoil. Those of you who've seen the movie know what I'm talking about. Lies! Oh, lies! Seth as Scott Evil, once again, does a great job. You can tell he really wants to get his father's approval in this film, and you do buy his combatancy with Vern Troyer as Mini-Me. Which Vern Troyer as Mini-Me, he really is good, and probably my favorite scene featuring him is his fight scene with Austin at the end of the movie, because he dominates that fight, which is part of the humor of it. And part of the humor of the scene, like when he does this toss thing to Austin. It's just funny, but he fits a lot of the scenes, and you buy his relationship with all the characters. Will Ferrell, the brief scene he's in as Mustafa, very good. Clint Howard, once again, as Johnson. Good job for what he has to do there. Kristen Johnson as the archetypal / stereotypical Russian female Ivana Humpalot. Yeah, she did a good job as well. If this is the correct actress, I believe around this time she was also in Flintstones and Viva Rock Vegas, which I'm gonna double check. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that was her. I thought she looked familiar. Following year, actually. She was in Austin Powers 3 as well, huh? Uncredited, oh, guess that's why. Background role, that's why I didn't recognize her. Let's see. Jerry Springer and Steve Wilkos as himself. Rebecca Romijn had a small role as herself, and this is a year, of course, before she started as Mystique in the X-Men movie. Woody Harrelson as himself. Tim Robbins is the president, who would be Nixon in that year, but they didn't do a caricature thing of him, which kind of would have been nice to see Tim Robinson doing Nixon. Dr. Evil. I could just imagine Nixon doing this. We have your money, Dr. Evil, but it wasn't easy. It's really easy, Crookus. I can't believe we're going to pay that madman. Luke's up the yin-yang. Just let me watch one. Sir, are you suggesting that we blow up the moon? Would you miss it? Would you miss it? You know, just those lines of dialogue would just be funnier coming out of Nixon's, his voice. Dr. Evil, I may not be a crook, but you are the worst kind of crook there is. A terrorist. And we do not negotiate with terrorists. Tim Robbins is the president, did a good job. And of course, this Commander Gilmore from the first movie, he's actors in the movie again, and he adds to the timing of that scene, the gag about the moon. Sir, are you suggesting that we blow up the moon? Which is kind of funny considering that you would think that the military commander would be all for it, but, maybe he took classes about how the moon is helpful or something. Now, funny thing is about the title of this movie is that it was changed a lot overseas, mostly to make it more less provocative, like The Spy Who Treated Me Nicely, The Spy Who Groped Me, among other stuff. But another title which was worse was The Spy Who Ejaculated on Me, which I'm trying to see which one that was real quick. Oh, that was the Norwegian title. Kind of raunchy, if you think about it. I did not even know what the word shag meant when I first saw the movie. Of course, it's now later. I'm like, oh, it's sexual slang. Oh, okay, that's kind of funny. And it fits Austin. I like the first film. There were a lot of deleted scenes, which I forgot to mention in my review of the first film. Out of all those deleted scenes, I think only one of them actually should have stayed in the film, and that was the brief little bit they cut out about Austin and number 2 having the deal. I had to buy the case. So in essence, I'm buying the case. I can understand why they cut it out, but I don't really think it would have slowed down the pace of that scene that much. It would have added more context to when Dr. Evil was like, alright, I've had enough. Here, out of the deleted scenes, there's only one really that I could think of that should have stayed in the movie. Would have been, I just don't know where it would have been put, but it's a deleted scene where Austin is trying to double check, I should say, that Felicity is not a fembot, so he's taking a metal detector and doing that. Doesn't go off until he gets around her crotch, and only then does she wake up and she's like, what are you doing? I'm just checking for coins. Just weird, and then it cut to the next one, but other than that, I can't really think of any other deleted scenes that should still be in it, except for probably one that would have been a funny after-credits scene involving the 2 number 2s. Technically, it's not cheating, which I got a little chuckle out of that. That probably would have been a better after-credits sequence than the one that's in it. Hello? Is the movie over? Now, on the whole, this film is parodying, like the first film, a lot of Bond movies, like, this is the list it gives: Dr. No, From Russia With Love, Goldfinger, Thunderball, Casino Royale, You Only Live Twice, On Her Majesty's Secret Service, Diamonds Are Forever, Live and Let Live, The Man with the Golden Gun, The Spy Who Loved Me, and Moonraker. And is also spoofing other movies like The Pink Panther Strikes Again, and that's about it. And of course it also has some other spoofs, like an Exorcist spoof, a Star Wars spoof, little joke at Independence Day, and some other culture stuff like the Alan Parsons Project. The thing though, I like how dramatic they make the Star Wars spoof. Austin, I am your father. Da-da, da. Really? No, not really. I can't back that up. I still have to admit, I get a good chuckle out of that. And then the Exorcist spoof, which they actually did have a scene earlier that kind of added more context to that. There's also some extended scenes, like extended thing of Mini-Me not driving the way that Dr. Evil wants him to, but I can see why it was put on the cutting room floor. And of course, like the first film, it has good use of music, like Beautiful Stranger, I think, was used appropriately. My Generation was good. American Woman, I think, fit the introduction of Felicity. Just the 2 of us, the Dr. Evil mix. It was funny. It was a fun scene. And I'll Never Fall in Love Again fit the scene. Of course, I'm a Believer also fit it. And then, of course, the original score music along with the theme by Quincy Jones. All good. Now, in conclusion, Austin Powers: The Spy Who Shagged Me is a fun comedy, spoofing what it's spoofing well. Well directed, well acted, well written, which is its probably main advantage over the first film. It's a little bit more well written, at least with dialogue. George S. Clinton did a magnificent score, and it deserved its money. It was made for $33 million, and it made $312 million. And as I mentioned before, it made in its opening weekend more than the first film it made in its entire run. So it showed that there was a fan base for the first film by the time this film came out. And of course, this is something I just found out, it was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Makeup, and you just look at Fat Bastard, you can understand why. Anyway, my rating for Austin Powers: The Spy Who Shagged Me, I'd say all things considered, probably a 4.5 out of 5 stars. I know that's a slightly higher rating than the first film, but I think personally it deserves it, but that's just me.